Good evening, ladies and gentlemen, and welcome to 2D6 Friday. You'll notice I didn't try and call you lentils and gentlemen, or lentils and JDs, or whatever it was I tried to say last time. So, hello there, folks. Do you find yourself throwing good money down the toilet? Do you find yourself setting good money on fire? Do you have Andy's floating head in your bathroom? I'd say that one's probably the least likely. So let's get off this image now, because it's a little bit silly, isn't it? And we don't abide silliness on this show. Hello there, ladies and gentlemen. We've got all the orange we've got here, multiple shades. The background, the jacket, and this shirt here are all slightly different shades. This is kind of maybe a salmon kind of orangey colour going on here. A little bit of hint of pink there. Okay, let's see who's in the audience tonight, because we've got some juicy topics to dive into shortly. Let's see who's made it onto the fabled active users list. We have Andrew Fairbanks, Bazooka J Rambo, Fake Near, Gloomed Ready Gaming, Mini Warrior, Auric Love God, The Soul Assassin, Newbie, Devil Doll 727. Now, I've got a question for you, Devil Doll. Are you named after the infamous film starring Hugo the Dummy? Or is that just something you came up with on your own? I would like to know. Oh, a couple more people. We've got, and of course it's one I may have trouble pronouncing, Rasantaya Vihaveno. And Stu Gibson. That one's a bit easier for me. Okay, folks, so the main issues tonight. I'm going to talk about making 40k fun. But first, we're going to talk about wasting money, because let's face it, this is something we all do. If we're all wargamers, we're no strangers to throwing good money away, either on products that we never get round to using, or maybe products that we only use very, very briefly and then never give back to them. Perhaps our friends that we wanted to play a particular system with moved away just after we invested huge sums into a particular system. So I'm going to give you some of my money-wasting tales, and maybe pass on some advice, some tips that I've picked up over the years. And then I'm going to look at various stories that I requested earlier on the old Facebook group, which is in the description. In fact, if anyone still wants to drop one in there, there's still time before I get to them, and I may read them out live on the show. Of course, you can fit more characters in there than you can in the text box in the comments here, which may stretch you over multiple comments if it gets too long, and then you'll be broken up with just inane newbie posts. So it would be quite difficult to read under those circumstances. So let's start off, shall we? And the first thing that one could argue was a waste of money in my wargaming life would be maybe my first ever major purchase, which would have been the Titan Legions Epic box. Now, in some ways, it wasn't a waste at all, because that was the first miniatures I painted using a delightful pink undercoat on many of the models. Looking back, I'm not even sure why I did that. The concept of undercoating is something that takes a while to get used to as a child. So just slapping on a neutral-ish kind of colour underneath that you can then paint the other colours over. And it just so happened that pink was the colour that seemed to be most suitable for that purpose out of the Citadel paint starter kit. So I did pick up some tips from painting them, learned a few valuable lessons, but I don't think I ever actually played a full game of it. So back then, how much would that have been? Probably about £40. I think that's how much the starter sets were then. The likes of 40k and all those would have just been £40. Now they're in the region of about 75, I think. And if they release another one, I'm sure it'll be even more than that with the way the currency is going over here. So I'm not sure whether to classify that as a waste or not. I did sell it in the end, but probably not for that much. Moving on, something that was definitely a waste of money would be Necromunda, because I did have various Necromunda models. Now, remembering exactly which ones I had is a struggle, because I had a few ancient White Dwarf magazines, and I would look through those and circle which models I wanted to buy. So I don't actually remember all of the models I bought and which ones I just thought about buying so much that the memory of owning them has been implanted into my brain somehow. But I do know that I owned at least a couple of factions. Or my brother and I owned maybe 3 or 4 factions between us, and then a few just random models as well. And we maybe played 1 game of it ever. That's it. 1 game. So I would say that was definitely a waste, but it was very early in Wargaming when people just kind of buy whatever grabs them firmly by the gonads, don't they? They don't put too much thought into it, especially children. If it looks cool, I'll have some of that if you don't mind, governor. And then whether you paint it or not is another issue. Whether you play it or not is another issue as well. Let's see, Blood Bowl is another one that falls into that category. I think I played 1 game of it, but I did have my Chaos. They were kind of Chaos and Beastmen back when they were merged. So the Beastmen with tentacles sticking out their arms. And I don't think I ever painted any of them. Played 1 game. That definitely goes down as a waste of money. A few people I knew were playing it slightly more than I was. I think they got a few games in. And Halfling Pete got his Halfling Blood Bowl team, which is still in this room somewhere from when he brought pretty much his entire miniature collection around here a few years ago, and then hasn't been back since. So if anyone wanted to play Blood Bowl with me, then I'm sure I could use those halflings, and he would be none the wiser because he would have to watch this show, which I know for a fact he won't do. But yeah, that was definitely a waste. Another one, Inquisitor. I had the set. Now, what was it called? It was kind of a space marine. It looked like he had power armor, and he had a little eyepiece, and then he came with a woman as well, and she was a bit more slender looking. She wasn't in power armor, except I switched their heads around because I thought that was cool. But Inquisitor, I know for a fact I've played 1.5 games of that, and that was all. And again, never painted any of them. So a lot of these so far, they're not a huge deal of investment gone into them. It was mainly just the starters or 1 small faction box or something, and then didn't really play any of it. However, in recent years, when I've built up a much larger miniature collection, then it's maybe easier to say that things were a waste of money as time went on. Because back in the day, there were a lot of armies I didn't use that much after owning them. For example, my Imperial Guard army. Now, I did play quite a lot of 40k, but I mostly played with Space Marines, and any other army that I got was pretty much doomed to fail. I must have played maybe 2 games with my Imperial Guard army that I spent hundreds on because they were all metal, the good old Talon Desert Raiders they were. Someone's asking for a bit of clarification here. The Soul Assassin, half a game. Yes, 1.5 games of Inquisitor. I played 1 full game and then another game that was never finished, and we never got back to it. Now, back to the old Talon Desert Raiders. So I bought a ton of them. I painted there was a lieutenant who had a bolt gun. I painted him. I may have painted 1 heavy weapon team, but I spent an obscene amount on them and never really painted them. I also got a load of tanks that I painted in those colour schemes as well, including Forge World turrets to put on the Lehman Russ tanks. And I bought 3 basilisks, I think. It must have been, because I had 3 Earthshaker cannons. And I put 2 of them together and lined up the 3 Earthshaker cannons to make a Gatling Earthshaker, which was in the old vehicle conversion rules when they released those in White Dwarf back in the day. So I went a bit nuts with vehicles then. So I must have spent many, many hundreds, well, I say many, many, a few hundred at least on that army, and played very, very few games with them. Very few at all. I played a ton with my Space Marines, virtually nothing at all with them. Maybe 2 games. I think I took some of my tanks into the old GW store once and played a game in there. But that's about it. Then, what else did I have that was kind of a waste for 40k? Eldar and Tau. I bought a few models for those armies. Eldar, I don't think I ever painted any models. Tau, I think I painted 1 drone, and that was it. I had one of the flying suits and some fire warriors and whatnot, but I never really painted them. Eldar, I used to love Dire Avengers for Eldar, so I had a few of those. But again, I don't remember painting 1 model for that army. As far as Warhammer Fantasy goes, let's see, armies that I didn't really use at all. Undead, back in the day. I had a lot of skeletons, but I think it was right before they changed edition. It was kind of the last thing they did before they moved it on to the next edition, and the next edition was the one that had the orcs and the empire in the starter box. The orcs with the chariots and the empire, you could either make the cannon or you could make the mortar. And then that was around the same time that they redid dwarves as well with the new plastic dwarf regiments. When I say new, I'm talking like year 2000 or 2001 here. So that kind of killed off my undead aspirations because they had the 3 or 4 different kinds of vampire back then. And then they kind of fiddled with that whole lore and it was never really the same again. So I had a lot of skeletons, which I quite liked, a lot of dry brushing going on with them, but I never really made any use of them at all. Probably played 1 game with that army that I probably spent, let's see, maybe £100 on them, including the army book as well. So you could call that wasted. Certain things, I probably wouldn't classify the undead as wasted because painting the skeletons is part of the whole learning process, I think. You can't call yourself a painter until you've gone through the process of dry brushing over some exposed bones, and there was plenty of that on offer. Now, before we go on, let's see if anyone's got any comments here. Let's see. Newbie apparently used to play Necromunda a lot back in the day. Well, I didn't. I just spent some money on it. He also says they need to redo the old Imperial Guard regiments. They were a pain in metal. Yes, they were. If they brought out plastic Talon Desert Raiders, that might actually inspire me to get more involved in 40k. I'm going to be talking about how 40k can be fun later on, because a lot of the time it's not, unfortunately. Let's see. Auric Lovegod has apparently wasted money on All Quiet on the Martian Front, Dystopian Wars, and to a lesser degree, Infinity, although he tends to paint everything. Yeah, as long as you at least paint everything, then you can say that you've got something out of it. If you enjoy painting, if you paint purely to get it on the table to play the games, and you never actually get around to playing any games, then you can call it a waste of money and time if you took no enjoyment and didn't learn any valuable lessons from your painting experience. Soul Assassin, Mordian Iron Guard are really cool. Yeah, a lot of the Imperial Guard were cool back then, including the Praetorians, which I think were pretty much Iron Guard with different heads, which, again, Halfling Pete, or Praetorian Pete as he's known in 40k, he's got a huge Praetorian army which is under a table right over there, which I have shown off on video before. And I'm going to have to ask his permission to use that in a game, I think, because I don't think he ever wants to play a game with it ever again. We'll see, though. Let's see, any other comments here? Auric Lovegod, Warzone First Edition, but then used the minis in Mutant Chronicles RPG. Yeah, so I wouldn't qualify that as a waste. Soul Assassin has done 40k for 18 years, and the past 3 months been painting Age of Sigmar, all because of this chat and me. And this is a really cool channel. Yes, this is a really cool channel. Very cool indeed. You just have to look at my choice of colours to know that. Auric Lovegod, don't get sucked in by the coolness factor. Well, what else can you get sucked in by? If you're going to be grabbed firmly by any YouTube channel, it better be a cool one. And there's none cooler than Andy2D6. Let's see, what else? Mini Warrior. The only things I spent money on and didn't use were some Gripping Beast and Relics miniatures. Yeah, I know quite a lot of people that have spent money on Relics and then never really got into the gaming side of it. I obviously played quite a lot of games of Relics, went to a few tournaments, still got aspirations of maybe doing some more hangout games of Relics at some point when the new edition finally drops. But I did spend quite a lot of money on it. Of course, I got all my Orknar for nothing. That was just sent to me by Dreddy, so we could do the hangout games with them. So that was nice. Let's see, anything else? Titan Edition. Andy, would you play Lude Bowl again? Which race would you like to play? That's an interesting one. Assuming that they don't add any new races, I would probably like to go for the dwarves. Because obviously, I'm a bit of a dwarf beard fiend, not only with my own stylish facial hair, but I am obviously an old school dwarf player. Still got all my dwarves, which I use now for Age of Sigmar, and potentially for Kings of War at some point. So I never played them in Blood Bowl though, so I would definitely like to try that one out. Peter Higgins bought the last stock from a store, about £1,500 on Warmer Hordes and Dead Zone Dreadball minis. Never used any of it. Nobody's telling him to sell them on. Yes. Anytime there's a bargain to be had and you end up spending a vast amount of money on it, there is always the possibility that you weren't really thinking it through in your mind. You just thought, look how cheap it is. I'm losing money if I don't buy it. And then you end up just not using it. Once you get it home and open it and realize, actually, what am I going to do with all this stuff? So yeah, I think I've done that a few times. Not a huge amount. I'm just looking around to see if I can see any models in here that I haven't really got much use out of. There is my Deathwing Land Raider, and this is going to be coming up a little bit in my 40k chat later on. But I have an issue with using really powerful units in 40k, and I don't like it very much. I don't like using the big, really powerful stuff. I think it works best when you're just using the less powerful, kind of squad-based, not necessarily billions of guardsmen or orcs that take an hour to shuffle across the table with a broom, but I don't like the really big, powerful tanks and flyers and knights and stuff. So spending the money on that was probably a bit of a waste, because I think I've played it in 2 games, and I don't really have any particular desire to use it again anytime soon. And also at the same time as that, I actually bought some more Deathwing Terminators, and they've just been sat on the painting table in this state. So there's 2 of them like this assembled, and then there's a load of bits as well. So from that little purchase, that's when I got my Deathwing Interrogator Chaplain as well. So that's the only one of those models that's seen any use out of that lot, out of that investment. And right next to that Terminator, in fact, is another thing that I haven't got any use out of at all, so you could definitely call this a waste of money. The Gyro Bomber for the dwarves. So before I actually finished painting it, I was kind of not too enthralled by fantasy anymore, because I was waiting for the end times to be over to see what was going to happen. And then since Age of Sigmar came out, I haven't been that inspired by using the dwarves, to be honest. I much prefer using the old Stormcast. So I don't know if this thing's ever going to get finished. I just didn't see a way of painting it to look nice at the time. Something really has to inspire me before I start painting it. Often things will sit on this very table for about 6 months or more, and then suddenly I'll think, wait a minute, I could just highlight it in this particular way, and then I'll just whiz through and finish it right there. That's usually what happens, but I can't see that happening with this. I have no idea how to go about taking this from where it is now to a state of completion. Let's see if it's going to focus in on this, on the lack of paintwork on it. Is it going to focus? Let's put a hand there. Yeah, there we go. That's close enough. See, you can see it doesn't even have the pilot in it yet. He's in a box somewhere. Maybe I'll get round to that one of these days. I've also got some Space Marine Devastators on this table as well. Totally untouched, because 40k didn't particularly interest me that much, and Space Marines got a bit boring after a while. Since you've painted a squad of Space Marines, I'm not that inspired to paint anymore, unfortunately. Let's have a look. Bloomed Ready Gaming says, my favourite 40k is Chaos Space Marines versus Chaos Space Marines without flyers and psychic stuff. Yep, that's the kind of thing I'm going to be talking about a little bit later. Peter Higgins, pro tip, just dip it. Now, I hope I haven't got that horribly out of context, and I've just read out a section of a really inappropriate conversation from the chat, but I'm assuming he's talking about speeding up the old painting of miniatures, which is actually what I did on all my Mantic Undead stuff. All of that is quick shade. Pretty much everything. I can't think of anything that isn't quick shaded offhand, and I can see it all over there in a box, ready for my next Kings of War tournament. Incidentally, I will be talking about the tweaking that I've made to my next Kings of War tournament list a little bit later on as well. The Hobby Habit. Andy, you just add a glitter paint to that to finish it off, and then base it on a doily. I don't think that would look very good at all. I think you're being very silly. Let's see here. Dino Titan Edition Space Marines are hard to paint after a while because they have a huge amount of big flat surface, and the edge highlighting can get really tiring. Yes, edge highlighting is fast, and I do like it, but just staring at a model before it's been edge highlighted, it feels like there's so much work to do. Let's have a look at this guy. Look at this Space Marine. He just looks so naked and terrible right now. Even though edge highlighting would almost finish him off in one fell swoop, it just looks like there's so much work to be done. It's entirely a mental thing with me and painting. If it looks like it's nearing completion, then I kind of whiz through it and get it all done in no time, like I've done with this Necromancer, which is actually Mr. Bones, the Reaper Bones mascot. So he was just sitting there, just green cloaked for the last year maybe. And then I thought, you know what, I could really do with a necromancer, because the two I've been using in my undead army for Kings of War aren't that appropriate. So I thought I'll just get him finished off. And I think he's almost done now. He needs a bit of sanding on his base, but I think he looks nice and dry brushed, at least in the cloak department, with his skull face. Quite a nice speed he's got there. I think the colours look pretty good. They fit in with the rest of the army. Let's see. Oh, we've got Danny Ashby in the chat, who hasn't been in here in a while. Unfortunately, Chrome won't load the vid, and Firefox is totally not working, so can only see the chat. Well, that's no good, is it? Internet browsers. Some people were saying they were having trouble on mobile devices accessing the chat. So maybe the trick is you have to have a mobile device to watch the video and then have some other device for actually chatting away. Maybe that's the trick for some people. So let's see. Anything else I have wasted money on? It was looking like I would have wasted a lot of money on my undead army, my vampire counts, which were mostly Mantic models for 8th edition Warhammer, because I didn't actually play very many games with them. I played a ton of undead games and Universal Battle, but actually using the undead, I only use them maybe thrice at most. And I spent a fair bit of money because it's quite a sizable army. There's a few Reaper miniatures in there that aren't that cheap, some metal ones, and a lot of time put into painting them, only because there's so many, not because each individual model took a lot of time, because obviously Quick Shade was employed heavily with that army. But I have got my money's worth back in the last few months, though, from getting heavily into Kings of War and Kings of War tournaments. So I've played a lot of games with them now, and they've definitely been worth it. Other game systems that I own that are just sitting in drawers collecting dust at the moment would be the likes of Drop Zone Commander, which I've probably played about 10 games of that. But I didn't spend a vast amount of money on Drop Zone Commander, though, because I got 2 starter sets. One was a free review copy, and then the other I won in a competition. So that was probably about 60% of my UCM Drop Zone Commander army for free, basically. And I don't think I had anything else for free off Hawk War Games for review purposes. I think I bought all the rest, or I got them as Christmas presents, maybe. So, yeah, they're just sitting in a drawer at the moment because they've just got so many of the games on the go. Bolt Action, sitting in a drawer, not being used for the last year or so, my Belgian army, but even if I'd never played a single game with that, I wouldn't regret it because they were a lot of fun to paint, a lot of fun to put that army together, and the whole backstory that goes with them and the funny little World War II, as it were, with Wilhelm Wonka and his chocolate factory blowing up, and the Belgians holding the secrets to the everlasting goose stepper and all that business. So that was a lot of fun. So even if I hadn't played too much of that, I would have still enjoyed that. And now that Bolt Action version 2 is out, then maybe I can start getting some more games of that in at some point soon. There are a few people around here that play it. I just haven't particularly reached out to anyone regarding that game in the last year or so, just because I've been so busy with Age of Sigmar, Kings of War, and so on. And Dead Zone is the other big one at the moment. Let's see. Newbie wants to know if Drop Zone Commander is any good. Yes, it is a very good game. And there's quite a decent-sized community for it in various places around the country. Around here in the northwest, it's quite healthy. I'm sure if I were to go on Facebook and challenge a couple of random people to a Drop Zone Commander game, I could get one in very, very soon. It's just not at the top of my priority list at the moment. Soul Assassin is departing before the end of the show. That's not good enough, I'm afraid. Not acceptable. Okay, I'm going to go over to the old Facebook group now and see if anyone else has commented on there. Okay, so we've got a couple of stories of people spending money frivolously here on game systems that they couldn't take advantage of. Let's see. This one is from Jason, who says, on the topic of spending a lot of money on miniatures and not using them very much, I've done that plenty of times, but I wouldn't say it was a waste. Regardless of whether it leaves Lead Mountain, I still enjoyed buying it. I mostly get games, so I have an excuse for painting more than of something. I rarely play any of them, but it's nice to have the option. Yeah, that's kind of how I feel about certain game systems. I like to have like my Drop Zone Commander army, my Bolt Action army, all my relic stuff in there, because you never know. someone could just move into my street next week who's really into one of those games, and if I'd sold them, I would regret it, because you wouldn't get that much money for used miniatures, really, would you? Unless they're painted to a professional standard, which mine aren't. So, yeah, don't really have any issues holding on to all those models for a long time. This one is from Dreddy, actually, who apparently sunk 300 to 400 euros into War Machine and Hordes, thinking that the models were cool, and then found out that pretty much everyone who plays here doesn't give a flying flock about painting minis or even using actual terrain, in all caps. That is an issue with the War Machine community that I have been made aware of many, many times. I haven't really played with too many parts of the War Machine and Hordes community. I've only had a couple of demo games, but it does seem that painting miniatures and using terrain is kind of bottom of their priority list. It's all about being a hardcore rules cheesemeister and squeezing as much cheese as you can, and everything in the game is overpowered. So if you have any special rules that the enemy just didn't know about because they haven't played against it before, you're going to auto win. And then they do learn about it, so they're kind of building up this encyclopedic knowledge of overpowered rules for certain models, and then something else will come out that's more overpowered than the last, so everyone has to buy that. And it seems to be very much like that. And they don't use terrain, of course, because it's like a precision down to the millimeter kind of game, and it's so competitive, so they would just rather have terrain that's just a flat piece of card with forest written on it. I think if you're going to do that, then you're probably better off just playing the War Machine PC game rather than the tabletop. That's how I would look at it, because the tabletop games, it's a huge part of it, painting the miniatures and getting the nice looking terrain on there. I mean, I use battle mats rather than having a kind of hugely big 3D table, but that's only like the backdrop underneath, and I do put terrain on top of it. It's just to have a nice flat surface for rolling dice, that more than anything else. The Hobby Habit, Forest Flat Pack card, very evocative on the table, yes. Or another piece of card that just says river or castle on it. Do people really enjoy that? I suppose it's just different people, isn't it? Enjoy different things from their games. Newbie isn't interested in Uber cheese type games, so that's why War Machine and Hordes doesn't appeal to him. Yep, that's always been my issue with it for the most part. Okay, let's see here. We've got one from Andrew on the Facebook group. Dead Zone First Edition. Went in hard, painted it all, which was a first, and then didn't enjoy the game one bit. Well, I have a similar story to that regarding Dead Zone, because Dead Zone version 1, I bought that when I was at my first Adepticon, and I really enjoyed putting the terrain together. That was a lot of fun, so it was worth it from that point of view. But then I realised, who am I actually going to play this game with? Because I didn't know anyone that was really interested in Dead Zone at the time. So it just kind of sat in a box, and I've still got unopened, like shrink-wrapped decks of cards from Dead Zone version 1 in the box somewhere over there. But after I unsuccessfully listed all of the Dead Zone version 1 stuff on eBay, nobody bought it. And then Dead Zone version 2 came out, and suddenly I knew people that were actually interested in it. It sparked a bit of interest around these parts. So I thought, actually, I could paint up those Plague, because I've painted the Enforcers and they're pretty hideous. Even though they're orange, I'd used quick shade on them, because by that point I'd realised no one wanted to play it, so I just wanted to rush them and get them out of the way. But the Plague, I put a bit of time thinking of a nice colour scheme for them, so I think they look pretty tasty. And then I very much enjoyed using them on the table. So in the long run, it was definitely worth it. Short term, it was not looking good for Dead Zone, though. Long term, definitely good. Let's see. This is from James. Dropped a load of Dystopian Wars stuff which I've never used. Yeah, I've seen Dystopian Wars around about the place. Don't think I've seen it in person. I've seen it floating around the internet, as it were. But it's never really grabbed my attention. I never thought it looked particularly interesting. The models just never grabbed me firmly by any particular sensitive body part, to be honest. Let's see. Anyone else in the comments who's got any tales of spending a lot of money on a game system and then never getting around to play it, or maybe even getting around to paint it, then let me know. The Hobby Habit is working on Dead Zone version 2 right now, trying to get it to an okay tabletop standard to play with his son. And apparently it's my fault for promoting Dead Zone on this channel. Did you hear that, Mantic? You better send me just bundles of free stuff now, because I'm bringing in untold business. Let's see. Bazooka Jerembo says GW is bringing out a battle mat 4x4 with rounded corners. What? Is that true? I would be surprised if that is true. GW, a 4x4 battle mat. That seems an odd size. What games are suited to 4x4 nowadays? None of GW's, I would say. Peter Higgins, apparently AVP Kickstarter. Speaking of Kickstarters, this is another big one that I hadn't got to yet. Dungeon Saga. You could look at that as a huge waste of money for me, because I think I got like the maximum pledge level, and I did get a couple of the expansions thrown in though, because I did some free promoting for Mantic. I say free, but they did actually give me something in the end for it. So a couple of the expansions were thrown in, but I did pledge very heavily on it to begin with, which was somewhere in the region of about £100, and I've yet to play it. I assembled, well, there isn't much assembly to do as such. So when I say assembled, what I really mean is the models who had like scythes that were leaning back, doing limbo dancing, I got some hot water and straightened them out. And then I haven't even base coated them yet, just because I haven't found anyone to play that with yet. So there's a lot of people that I play the games with around here. They're generally into one or two systems, and they don't have time to get into new ones. They play so infrequently that they really can't expand their wargaming horizons that much. For example, the chap that I played 40k with the other day, I think he has some obscene number of children, like 4 or 5. So he only gets to play any games at all, other than like at his own home or very nearby. He only gets to get out to play 40k like once every few months, so doesn't have a lot of time to get into other systems. The Hobby Habit, who is in on Star Saga? Well, we're going to look at that in a bit, actually. I'm probably not going to go in on it, although I do think it looks very, very interesting, just because I can't possibly justify spending that money on a game when I haven't even played Dungeon Saga yet. But in the future, I would definitely consider going for some Star Saga action. It's just not a good time at the moment, with Dungeon Saga sitting there staring at me with its accusing eyes. Let's see. Mini Warrior. Aren't the Star Saga minis going to be Restic? I don't know. The Hobby Habit thinks they are. I thought Mantic were moving away from Restic. Well, I'll have a look at the Kickstarter page shortly. Let's see. No more comments on the old Facebook topic there. Again, I would encourage everyone to join the Facebook group by following the link in the description if you haven't already. And now, I think it's time to talk about the next topic, which is 40k. Is it fun, or is it terrible? Can it be terrible and fun at the same time? And I would actually say yes, because the rule system is the most needlessly complicated treasure hunt of a system that I can think of. I can't think of any other game system where virtually every unit has a special rule, but it doesn't tell you what it does. And there are billions of those special rules. If you look at Kings of War, for instance, you'll see a unit has, for example, Vicious, and it doesn't tell you what it does right there. But there are only something like 20 of those special rules, and they're all different. They're not all exactly the same, and there isn't a rule that grants you multiple other special rules that also aren't named. So it's not as much of a treasure hunt. With Kings of War, if you don't know what your rule is, you just turn to the special rules page. Yep, there it is. With 40k, it's, well, this Space Marine has the "They shall know no fear" special rule. You think, okay, well, what does that mean? And then you go to the Space Marine Codex, and it'll say "They shall know no fear" grants them fearless and something else. And then you go, well, what does fearless do? Okay, I better go to the rule book now. Fearless, they do not have to do this. They're not affected by so-and-so. Okay, what does that do? And it goes on and on like that. It's not just Space Marines, but they are one of the big offenders. They often have rules that lead you to the next 2 or 3 rules that they have. It's like a pyramid of rules. The rule that unit has one name, which takes you down to the next layer of the pyramid, which is wider because it has 2 special rules. Then those special rules don't tell you what they do either. They just lead you to 3 different special rules that the unit might have. And it's an endless mess of trawling through the rule book, unfortunately. So, with that in mind, how can 40k be a fun game if you spend a lot of time going through the rule book? I would say, once you've played it enough times, so you've got the majority of those rules down for the armies that you're using. So you can't be playing different armies all the time, as far as I'm concerned, for 40k, because you will get lost and you'll forget all the rules. That's just my opinion. I'm not sure there's some people that can, and particularly hardcore tournament players will know all the rules off by heart anyway. Like, I know some people had issues with the old 8th edition fantasy rules, but I was pretty comfortable with all of those by the time it came to a close. I think I knew the vast majority of all the rules somewhere in the back of my mind. Although I do have quite good memory, though, and I know some people don't. But the most important thing, I think, in 40k is not playing it competitively. It's only my opinion, of course. I think it has to be played in a more laid-back, fun environment than any other game, as far as I'm concerned. Some games lend themselves to that by the rules. If you look at Age of Sigmar, the rules are very simple, and you could call it streamlined, so the game just flows in a nice, smooth manner. 40k, if you're playing it to the fullest extent of your competitiveness, then it can get bogged down, I think, very quickly. So you have to be playing it with people that are just looking for a good time, basically. Maybe that's what all those people in those public toilet walls were talking about. Maybe they just wanted to play 40k in a friendly manner. Anyway, before newbie comments on that, Dino Titan Edition is in agreement with me. Exactly like that, he says. Yep, so the issue I have with 40k, the big one, is the prevalence of units that just auto-delete other units. Because when you spend a long time painting your models, or you just like the look of your army, and you spent a long time buying and assembling them, perhaps, you don't have to necessarily spend a long time painting them, but they're yours, and you put them on the table, you want them to do a job. There are an awful lot of things in 40k that will just delete that off the table before you have a chance to do anything with it. Everything can kill everything quite easily. Now, you could say that it's similar to that in Age of Sigmar, but very rarely have I seen entire Age of Sigmar units just been wiped off the table, mainly because there's no big gigantic templates. But in 40k, of course, you've got your D weapons, you've got Imperial Knights that can just step on a unit and just wipe all of them out without even any dice being rolled. Anything that just deletes what you've got without the ability to roll the dice. And it's easy to make the use of those overpowered units as well. If you were to compare it to a game I would consider more strategic and positional, something like a Kings of War, if someone takes a unit that you think is really overpowered, and if it hits you, you're going to die, you have ways of preventing it from hitting you with positioning. With 40k, it's because you have a lot of freedom and you have deep strike and reserve and all this kind of stuff, and flyers that can just cover the entire table in one go, pretty much. It's so difficult to avoid the auto-delete units. So I think the way to make 40k fun is to just not use any of them. No Forge World nonsense, no Imperial Knights, no flyers, no Land Raiders, none of the really big stuff. A couple of vehicles, maybe. Minimal heavy weapons. Still take heavy weapons, but not an obscene number of them. I remember I played one 40k game a few months ago, where because my team was orcs and we were bringing a stomper, the opposition knew that, and they brought something like 35 twin-linked las cannons, which is funny, but not necessarily fun without the knee on the end. Funny, but the game was, again, the game was funny, but I don't think it's fun to use those kind of really big units. I don't enjoy having a stomper taking up half the table. I don't enjoy one side having a billion twin-linked las cannons and D weapons, and another side having just endless demolisher cannons and battle cannons, just deleting everything in sight. If you're taking nothing but Chaos Cultists or Gretchen, then yes, you expect them to get deleted, because that's what they're there for. But when there are weapons that can just be dropped in the middle of a unit of Space Marine Terminators, and you don't even get to roll the dice, they just have to come off the table, I think that's excessive. And I think that kills a lot of my fun with 40k, when those kind of overpowered units are used. So the way I like to play it is it's kind of old school. If you think back to the likes of 2nd edition, where someone having an orc war bike in their army was suddenly a big deal, and it dramatically changed the complexion of a game. If you were just playing with the old 2nd edition starter box with a couple of tactical squads, a load of Goth orcs, and a load of the single pose Gretchen with their auto guns, then adding an Orc war bike or just a Space Marine bike or a Dreadnought or something made a big difference to the game back then. And because of the kind of crazy arms race that's gone on and making bigger and bigger models, and now we've got Imperial Knights that are just a pretty standard sight on gaming tables that just wipe everything out. I yearned for a return to the days when just the small little unit of Space Marines, or even a unit of Orcs or Grots, as the Gretchen are called now, can actually play a pivotal role in the game, rather than just, well, I've got them in here in case I need to sit on an objective and hope that I don't get a template on their heads, because they're all just going away otherwise. Let's see what people have got to say about this in the comments. Barrett Musselman is here. I think the units that are all but immune are a lot less fun than units with D, and it's pretty easy for some armies to make Death Stars. Yeah, there are some things that are very difficult to kill. There's some Tau stuff, I think it's Tau, where they can like pop up and shoot, and then they can pop down again. Very difficult to find to kill them. And Eldar have a few things like that as well, I think, or they can move and then shoot you and then move away again. So if you're slower than them, you just have 0 chance of catching them, which isn't fun at all. Anything that's overpowered has potential to be fun if it's used in a balanced force. So if it's in the right hands, if it's in the hands of a hardcore competitive player, then if they're going to squeeze every last drop of cheese from every orifice, then you're going to have a cheesy experience, it's safe to say. Let's see. Dino Titan Edition, 40k in 40 minutes. Yeah, if you could play a 40k game in 40 minutes, that'd be great. Just a couple of squads, nothing too crazy. A couple of squads and a Dreadnought on one side, a couple of squads and a Rhino or something on the other side. That's how 40k used to be, as far as I'm concerned, and that's when it was fun. And it was a huge deal when I got the Lehman Russ Demolisher tank. That completely changed how our games were played. But nowadays, it's a bit too crazy for my liking. Let's see. Demon Lizard from Outer Space, or should I say demon_lizard_from_outer_space. I look forward to test Kill Team. Yes, that's another thing. A lot of people have been saying that Kill Team is the way to go for 40k. I've not tried it yet, but that could be fun, definitely, because it puts a lot of emphasis on each individual model rather than just, here's a template, whoosh, delete that. So I like the sound of that. Newbie says, I don't think Knights should be in it, unless it's Apocalypse. Yeah, there is a charm, obviously, to playing Apocalypse games, where you just bring the biggest, most ridiculous stuff you can on the table, and then everything just goes until everything has exploded. I can see how that's fun, but I don't think every game should be like that. Certainly, if you look at something like the PC game Dawn of War 2, the kind of level of engagement you get in that, where the battles aren't so crazy necessarily. You're not always fighting with vast numbers of troops, but it's very involved, and you're kind of down there in the trenches with the Marines or the Orcs or what have you. So I think focusing a little more on the individual man on the ground rather than this huge knight, although Imperial Knights are in Dawn of War 3, which isn't out yet, so it'll be interesting to see how they've worked them in there without making it a bit silly and overpowered, perhaps. Let's see. Barrett Musselman, those units come from APOC to help shorten the game. Yes. Units just wiping each other off the table is an Apocalypse thing, because you don't want the game to take 3 days. So you need unit deleters. But the thing is, they've found their way into smaller games now. Some people just take an army that's nothing but 2 Imperial Knights. Very, very silly, if you ask me. Let's see. Stu Gibson, if they simplify 40k like they did Fantasy, I'd probably get into it again, eyeing up that Skitari start collecting box. Yes, I'm very much hoping that they do Age of Sigmarify 40k. I'm looking forward to that big time. Not just for the rage and the scent of burning Space Marines in my nostrils from around the globe, and the ozone layer being irreparably demolished by those fumes, but I'm also just looking forward to playing the game in a way that's more conducive to being enjoyable. Because the old treasure hunting, it does get really old. Let's see. Someone mentioned something about the Tau Prairie Dog gun line, the Hobby Habit said. I don't know if someone else mentioned that first, but yes. Things popping up, shooting, hiding again. Nope. Don't like it. Newbie says Necrons are boring. Necrons kind of have that thing where they glance vehicles to death very easily, don't they? I don't know whether they got rid of that, but that's the last time I played against Necrons, I think that was the case. So vehicles blow up too easily now. In the old days, when it was a big deal and you had those cards with the damage tables for each vehicle, and each one had their own, so it would like be on a 4+, a large explosion tears through the crew compartment. Roll the dice for each model on board. On the roll of a 4, 5, or 6, they are hit and killed. When you destroy vehicles now, there isn't even a risk to the models inside, because that would be so ridiculously underpowered as a mode of transport, because they're so easy to blow up. They used to be difficult to damage back in the day, so it was actually like an epic cinematic moment when a tank blew up and guys were in it. It was rare. It didn't just happen every turn like it would do nowadays if they had a rule like that. Let's see. Anybody else? Bazooka J. Rambo. Rick Priestley even said that he didn't intend 40k to be full army. It's just a skirmish game as it started out. Yes, and I think, I'm not saying it should go back to being a full-on skirmish rogue trader type. I think there is a middle ground to be had. And I don't think 3rd edition was too crazy, the one where they first introduced Dark Eldar. I thought that one was all right. Maybe going back to something like that. There weren't as many silly special rules as there are now. That was kind of streamlining process that they went through to make that edition, so maybe going back to something like that would be good. I played a lot of 3rd edition 40k, actually. That's when I got my green Space Marines, and who did I play against a lot? Orcs, Dark Eldar, Praetorians, anything else? Other Space Marines. I think someone I know had Black Templars. So yeah, I played a lot of that edition, and that was quite a simple one. Let's see. Dreddy says, oh no, I just lost that comment. Yeah. The way this comment box works, as soon as I scroll anywhere near the actual bottom of the comments, suddenly it starts scrolling all the new ones in, so I can lose where I am quite easily. Dreddy says, every unit had more worth on the table back in the day. I remember how scared I was of Carnifexes or Gene Stealers. Today I just point stuff at them and they roll over. Yes, everything goes down too easy. And I don't like it. No, sir, I don't like it, as Mr. Horse might say. Let's see. Dino Titan Edition. I always thought Space Marine armies should be really small. Yes, if you read any of the Space Marine fluff, then it seems like 2 Space Marines could take on an entire planet's worth of orcs. So it's never made sense that 10 orcs versus 10 Marines should be a fair fight, even in close combat. So that was always weird, that Space Marines die so easily. Let's see. Dreddy, it's made it a way higher model count game, says the Hobby Habit. Yes, I think it probably has. Everything dies so easily, so you just need more stuff. You need to spend more money. Gene Stealer Cult starter set, Bazooka J. Rambo. Yep, that is pretty damn cool. Apparently Mini Warrior has ordered some Gene Stealer starter set stuff. If I've misinterpreted that, then you should let me know. Dreddy says, back in 2nd, we played with half the stuff as today, and the games were just as or even more interesting and in-depth. Always felt like a cool battle adventure. Yes, if you look at any of the old battle reports for 40k in White Dwarf, any of the really old ones, like talking pre-White Dwarf issue 200, that kind of time, then it felt like things weren't just going to die instantly. You would see one model being peeled off a unit, and you would think, oh my god, that's a big deal, a Terminator died. Now, you don't think twice about 10 Terminators being just removed in one go. And, yeah, again, I don't like it. Newbie says, apparently Necrons still have the glance everything on a 6. Oh dear, oh dear. Because if vehicles had a ton of hull points, I could understand that. I could understand them being easier to damage, it being a slow, cumulative process, like the monsters have in Age of Sigmar, where once they've taken 6 wounds, they halve their attacks. If they did that with vehicles for 40k, I would actually like that a lot. If, let's say, a Predator starts off with 15 wounds, and then when it drops to 10, suddenly you can only fire the sponsons and not the turrets, and then as soon as it drops to 5, you can only fire like the Storm Bolter on it or something. You get the idea. And it would get slower as well, as it takes more wounds. And then, of course, you could have your Tech Marines that could put like D6 or D3 wounds back on it. I'd like to see that. That would be a good change as far as I'm concerned. Let's see, anything else? YouTube newbie. It's the fault of the fluff and for making Space Marines seem too overpowered. Yes, that could be the case, but the fluff writers and the rules writers really should get together and decide how powerful a Space Marine is and stick with it. Because it's a little bit silly, if you ask me. Okay, I think I've pretty much summed up my thoughts on 40k and how overpowered units are a little bit silly and how it should go back to a simpler time. And it seems to me that the audience is in general agreement with me. So we're going to look at some other stuff now. Now, I wonder if you'll be in agreement with me on these things as well. First of all, we're going to look at the old GW website just to show you that there's very little in the way of new releases. And I think this new monthly White Dwarf format is kind of limiting how much we have to look at each week now. It feels like there isn't new stuff popping up every week anymore. So it's going to be a struggle for any shows that are 100% GW content based. Of course, they do look pretty tasty, but we don't need to stare at them endlessly. Let's just have a quick look at these, I suppose. 360. They do look cool and they are very tempting, but I'm not doing anything 40k related in terms of buying until I've seen what the new edition is going to be like. Just holding off on it. Now here's something from Warlord Games. I was looking through their new releases section in my research phase of preparing for the show, and I saw inflatable World War II shells. Now then. So let's have a look at this 17-pounder shell. Okay, look at the size of that. Let's see if it tells us exactly how big it is. So, 875mm by 133mm. That is quite sizable. But why would you want a giant inflatable shell? If anyone knows, then let me know. If they're just a cool novelty item, I could understand like a history nut buying these and decorating their room with them. But yeah, a little bit strange a release if you ask me. And I think it was on, oh no, it was on page 2. Let's see what else they've got. They also had the 75mm shell. This one's a little bit cheaper, only £8. So maybe people who are going to Warlord conventions can take these and kind of wave them around in the queue outside waiting to get in. You know, like the big foam fingers at sporting events, wrestling and so on. I'm not sold, though. If anyone thinks these are a great product and they're going to buy dozens of them, then let me know. But I'm not sure they're going to be on my immediate purchase list. It's heavily branded, it seems to be on there as well. The Tank Museum and River Horse on the shell. Yeah, I'm not sure what the deal is with these. I just thought it was a funny thing that I saw, so I thought I should share it with you. Moving on, let's see how Star Saga's doing, shall we? So it's nearly up to 2,000 backers now, over double the original goal, 21 days left still. And I want to have a look at what some of the stretch goals have revealed. And there we go, show the full product description. So it should have all the stretch goals in here. One thing that I did really like, actually, that I saw that interested me greatly. Let's see if I can find him somewhere. Nope, he doesn't seem to be on here. There was a dwarf who can apparently place turrets. That will be him there, the question marks. He can apparently place like sentry guns and force fields and stuff. Yeah, there's just sentry guns there. I really like that concept. I think that would be really fun to play as. As far as everything else, where's the stretch goal tree? There it is. Yeah, there's the dwarf. So he's not been unlocked yet. $230,000 to get him unlocked. How far off that are we? Not too far. You would expect him to get unlocked in the allotted time. And then this alien kind of monk dude would be after that, and then turrets, 3D sentry guns and force fields. So prior to that, they would probably be card, I imagine, and then once they hit 245,000, they will actually be produced. Now, someone was asking whether it's in Restic, all this stuff. So I'm going to try and find out. Let's see if we can find it anywhere. Well, it doesn't tell us there. Let's go to high quality figures. 32 highly detailed miniatures molded from premium plastic. So that does sound like Restic. Or is it, though? I'm not sure, because I'm sure I've heard Restic referred to as premium plastic before. I'm not sure. I'll have to ask someone at Mantic whether it's Restic or not, because I haven't seen any of their newest Kickstarters. For example, the plastic in Dungeon Saga was not Restic. That was a different kind of plastic. So if it's the same kind, then that's fine. It's not Restic in that case. And the Hobby Habit says it's the Dungeon Saga coloured plastic. Okay, so if it's the same plastic as Dungeon Saga, then it's not Restic, if that's officially confirmed there. Mini Warrior, they say the Strider is Restic. I think a lot of the things that are somewhat new that are coming out in Restic now aren't technically new as such. They're kind of things that are being re-released, like the Dead Zone Plague. A lot of those are coming out again in Restic just because they're re-releasing the whole faction. And some of the ones that have got new sculpts are in plastic as far as Dead Zone goes. And then the ones they haven't got new sculpts, they're just releasing the whole faction as a whole. So they just re-release the old ones as they were, which is still in Restic. And to be honest, I've never had a huge problem with Restic. I don't know about you guys. A few people are saying Restic is awful, but I've never had a big issue with it. A lot of my stuff is Restic. I've got Restic Revenant Knights. I've got Restic Kings of War Trolls and more beasts. Fleabag Riders. And occasional issue with the bits going together, like the Fleabag Riders. But the detail on them is really nice. I think that makes up for it. And the Trolls, the Kings of War Trolls, I would much rather have them in Restic than in metal, because they'd be so heavy. They'd just be such a big chunk, and I'd have to pin absolutely everything. And pinning into metal is a nightmare because it snaps your drill bits, and you get pieces of metal flying off into your eyes, and it means you have to wear goggles, which is not ideal because I like to be lazy. Dreddy says, Restic isn't great, but at least it doesn't go floppy in the summer. Very sturdy, which is part of the problem. Yes, it's very sturdy, so it can be difficult to get the mold lines off, but that sturdiness does mean that it's not going to just flop as soon as the sun pops out from behind a cloud, like certain other materials, which I will name, other materials such as Finecast, in fact. Finecast is great for working with because you can cut it very easily and clean it up very easily and modify it and snip pieces off left and right, but you don't want to leave it in a hot car or you'll just come back to, well, you won't come back to a puddle exactly, but if there's anything like a horse reared up on its hind legs, it's not going to stay in that pose long if there's any kind of heat. So I dread to think how people living in hot places, I'm thinking somewhere like Texas maybe, how do they deal with Finecast? Because it must be absolutely roasting there at all times. I would much rather have Restic than Finecast, to be honest. Although both materials, I think, are very harshly criticised. Anyway, let's finish looking at this. So they've got the 3D furniture, which is, of course, the same as Dungeon Saga had, but obviously more with a sci-fi twist. And I kind of like the little story they've got going on with this game as well. It's not exactly what I thought it'd be. It seems to be you're like a band of mercenaries who've been abandoned on a facility of some kind, and it's related to some kind of outbreak. And I was thinking it would be more like you're a band of misfit heroes, like one Forge Father, one human, and so on, fighting against all the alien scum. But it looks more like you're just a band of... you are still kind of a ragtag band, but you're not like the holiest and the forces of good from every faction coming together, is what I'm trying to say. They are just more like mercenaries fighting against the corporation. And I expected the corporation to be among the good guys, and they're kind of the enemy in this game. So that's what I'm getting at. That's what's different from what I envisioned originally. So another Kickstarter I want to look at that I haven't looked at yet because it only just launched tonight is Ark World Troubles in the North, which has already shattered its goal, actually. That's nuts. It's only been up for a couple of hours and it's already funded 109 backers. 109 backers at that level. They must have put in quite a lot of money each. Let's have a look. So let's see what the average amount someone's been backing is. They've got quite a lot, £75. 10 people on £140. So that makes up a lot of money. And then quite a few people on 50. Not very many going for the lower end here. So Ark World, of course, is a skirmish game. And I'll show you some pictures of some of the miniatures here. There's an example right there. And I don't know too much about the fluff of this game. I probably did hear about it at some point, but I can't remember. I think I've got one Ark World model somewhere on my table. I've got a halfling on a pony, which I never got around to painting. But I can tell you, though, that the Ark World models are incredibly nice and well detailed. Having seen a lot of them up close and personal at conventions and such, they are very, very tasty. So I'm sure I'll come back and look at this at another point when more of the stretch goals have been revealed and we can get some proper close-ups. But for now, just a little taster for everybody, because it's only just launched, so there's not too much info to take from this yet. But just making everyone aware that it exists, and it's quite a tasty-looking little skirmish game, which is apparently doing very well on the old funding levels. Okay, so let's see. Before we look at a couple of little tweaks to my Kings of War list, we've got a couple of people still talking about Restic. Mini Warrior says, I couldn't clean the mold line and flash off my Restic Rebs. Yes, there are a few Mantic models where it's really, really difficult with the Restic to clean the mold lines off. If it's a thin model with thin legs or a thin arm or a gun, perhaps, that's got a mold line on it, it can be a bit of a nightmare because you have to really put some force in to get the mold lines off the Restic material. So you can end up, I wouldn't say damaging it exactly because it's very sturdy material, but sometimes you can end up cutting more than you intended or kind of pushing the arm in a way you weren't supposed to. But overall, I don't have a huge problem at all with the Restic. Like I said, the Restic Trolls, 100% fine. Really, really easy to convert. And what I would recommend is, if you do have any issues with it, if it's the sticking that's an issue for you, because I know some people have had problems gluing Restic. I personally haven't, but I've heard of people that have. Try and make more connection points. So what I've done with one of my trolls, because I converted the arm, I've reposed it. It was supposed to be kind of like this, and I've got it like that. So obviously there's like a big blank space there, which I filled in with green stuff. So there's only a small amount of Restic on Restic to do the sticking with. So I kind of angled part of it so it was touching in a different place and things of that nature. So I've got one where he's got his weapon being held across his body, like cutting into his own wrist, one of my trolls, which was mainly to just give me 2 connection points because I was reposing the arm and I wanted another spot to be super glued. And then in the armpits, I've done pinning as well when I've reposed them. But there's no way I'd be able to do that with metal. I would never be able to cut that much off of a metal model without some hardcore power tools or something, and that would just be an absolute nightmare. And anyone that's drilled into metal, you can have issues with that because it does get quite hot as well. Drilling into plastic as well is a little bit annoying because it melts on you. So Restic might actually be one of my preferred materials to drill into, actually, because I don't think it melts as readily as the regular plastic, like the sprue plastic that you would get. I drilled through the arms of my Kings of War Goblin Spearmen, so I could then drill into the metal arms and put a pin through to both sides and stick the arms on at the shoulders. So there's like a continuous pin running from arm to arm all the way through the body. And when I was drilling through the plastic bodies, they did melt quite badly as I was doing that. So I had to constantly clean off the drill bit. And then drilling into those tiny little metal pieces, if you grip them in your hand, then they get very, very hot, which obviously isn't great. And if you grip them in some kind of vise, then you can actually crush the detail on metal miniatures, which isn't ideal. So pinning onto metal is a bit of a nightmare at the best of times. Mini Warrior, Restic doesn't saw. Are you sure about that? Because for all my Restic cutting needs, I have used this tool here, which I think is Tamiya. Yeah, a Tamiya saw. This is what I used for cutting all my Restic stuff. Very, very, very fine teeth. Very, very good saw. I've used this on a lot of different materials. I used it on a Barbie doll to make my hideous Slanesh crab defiler. And I've definitely used it on my Restic Kings of War trolls to repose the arms. I definitely use this to do all the cutting, because a knife, that would be a nightmare on Restic. I think a knife. You could use a knife on Finecast, but on Restic, you would start cutting in and then it would just slide off and cut your hand off, I think. So I would beg to differ there. I think a saw is ideal for cutting Restic. If other people have different experience, maybe you just have a different type of saw that's not as good as mine. Let's see. Mini Warrior says Jojo Man couldn't saw his Strider. Yes, I did. I remember hearing about that, actually. I don't know why he had a problem with that, actually. Maybe his saw's just not very good. That could be it. Let's see. Mini Warrior, imagine if GW did a Kickstarter. Imagine if they did. What would it be for? If GW did a Kickstarter, what would it be funding? Let us know what you think, folks. Let's see. Peter Higgins, what was the softer plastic that Mantic used? I'm thinking getting my materials mixed up. The softer plastic, are you thinking of the kind of Dungeon Saga plastic, which is not quite bones, not quite normal plastic? It's somewhere in between. It's better than your average board game plastic, but not as good as your average Wargaming miniatures plastic. It just sits somewhere in the middle, but it is cost effective. Newbie, give us a screenshot of the Defiler. I need good nightmare material. Well, you don't need a screenshot because soon there is actually going to be a 40k battle report featuring the Defiler. I played a 40k game the other day, Slanesh, Chaos Space Marines versus Ravenwing, and the Defiler was a part of that. To give you a little sneak peek into the scenario as well, it was a Slanesh outpost which was being used to produce unsafe children's goods which were being shipped around Imperial space. For example, car seats with spikes in them, teddy bears covered in asbestos and things of that nature. So you can look forward to seeing the Ravenwing trying to purge that particular evil. Did the Hangout just temporarily go off the air? I'm sure I saw the live button replaced with off air for a fraction of a second and then come back. So it may have cut one of my sentences in half. I certainly hope not. Anyway, so there's one last thing I want to just touch on briefly, because I've already talked at great length in other videos about my Kings of War undead list. But I want to just tell you a couple of the tweaks that I've made for the tournament next week. So this is you can see the actual file name is called Maybe Undead 2000C. That means it's the third Maybe Undead 2000 list that I'm thinking of modifying to. So I've got a few others as well, but I'm leaning towards this one at the moment. So I've still got my skeletons and the zombies, they're the same. Now, the only things I've taken out one necromancer and I've taken out the wraiths because I don't think I'm proficient at using them yet. And I think having two flyers that can't just turn and face whichever way they want before flying off was messing with my brain too much. So I've taken the wraiths out, taken a necromancer out, and to replace all that, I have upped the werewolves to a horde, because I was finding that the just regiments of werewolves, while they were good and they annoyed people, when it comes down to a fight, only doing 9 damage, or 9 attacks, should I say, it wasn't enough. So I've gone for the horde, because it's only about 80 points more. So I've gone for that, and then I've also put in a Revenant King on a horse. So instead of having the second Necromancer, I've put him in there, and also because I've got less fighting units, because I've taken out the Wraiths, the Revenant King can kind of be a dual role. He can do the surging, because he's got Surge 6. He can be inspiring. So I've got more inspiring than before, because I've still got the inspiring talisman on the Necromancer. So I've got more inspiring. He can surge. He's also going to be surging from height too, so he can surge over the top of my own units. Whereas the Necromancer can't see that high, because I don't have a Necromancer on a horse. So it'd be handy for that purpose. And then when it comes down to a fight, or if I need to throw a roadblock in someone's way, then he's the same amount of points as the Wraiths. So he can just fly in, or well, they could fly in there. He can ride in there on his horse and get in the way and actually do some fighting. So I've kind of merged the role of the Necromancer and the Wraiths into just this guy here. And then also upped the size of the werewolf unit. That's pretty much the only difference I've made to this list. And this is the one I'm leaning towards. So overall, I've got less units on the table, but I've got just as many fighting units, because the Revenant King can fill that role, because he's pretty decent in combat. He's got crushing strength, 5 attacks. So he's all right, and he's got good nerve as well, on par with the vampire's nerve. So I wouldn't be throwing him in willy-nilly into combat like I would a vampire, because they're just absolute monsters. But he's definitely going to have a role to play. and I'm sure he'll end up fighting in every game. And of course, I've got Bane Chant on this Necromancer as well, so I think that will help out my zombies a lot. Another unit that could make use of Bane Chant would be the werewolves, potentially, as well, if they end up in a position where they have to fight something with really high defense, because they only have the crushing 1. And I would have put the Brew of Strength on them, but I just ran out of points, and I didn't want to ditch anything else, because I really like the Caterpillar Potion on the Soul Reaver Cavalry. I think it's a really good investment for them, because they rely on that hitting on a 3. You don't want to be hindered, and then you lose your Thunderous Charge 2 as well, which is a huge deal. So I think that's a great item for them. And I wanted my Revenant King to be on a horse, because I want him to be kind of behind my lines, but then also have the possibilities to just shoot out and block up enemy units. So he needed the horse. I want the wings for my vampire, because I just love having a flying vampire. And I want the ensorcelled armor on the Pegasus, because I just love having defense 6 vampires. So I don't think I could really ditch anything else. The hobby habit. Why no more goblins, Andy? Why? Well, there will be goblins again at some point. This is only going to be 3 tournaments in a row I will have used undead. I may well take the goblins to the next one after that. There are a couple of goblin lists I'm working on, and I'm still painting another giant as well. So I might take a 3 giant list to a tournament at some point. I think that would be funny. And the main problem was with the goblins, I just wasn't having that much success with them, and I just tried out undead, did okay. Then last time I did even better with them. So I thought I might as well make a few tweaks, see if I can push it even further. And if I do really well with them, then I'll just draw a line under it there and say, okay, let's go back to goblins for a bit. And if I do as well as last time, then I might continue to make little tweaks and take them to more tournaments. Or I might just like mix and match, switch in and out. Or I could do some bizarre like undead allied with goblins list, maybe even for some tournament. I probably wouldn't do that because I like having like a cohesive look to my army, but it would be an option, certainly. Hobby habit, yeah, your last game seemed really good. Yeah, I'm really getting into the swing of undead, tactics-wise, and I think I'm seeing things on the table, and I know pretty much what to do. So I'm not running down the clock too much in my games. I'm not running out of time, and I'm making mostly decent moves, I think. So while I'm on that roll, I don't want to mess that up by switching to a different army just yet. I'm also thinking about doing dwarves at some point as well, though. So we'll see how that goes. Fluffy Dread, where is this tournament happening? This next one is going to be in around about Leicester. So it's quite a long trip down there. Let's see. Apparently the Hangouts had a very short stutter, so it didn't cut off any of my sentence, so that's nice. So if anyone has any comments on this list, let me know. If any of the Kings of War enthusiasts are in here at the moment. If you think I don't have enough units, I'd keep in the 2 skeleton regiments because they're so cheap, and I need something that isn't just a really expensive unit. If I need something to sit on an objective or carry tokens or get in someone's way, that's what I need them for. Mini Warrior says, close to Rem, laundry special confirmed. Well, yes, Leicester is where the old Rimster lives, but usually he is very busy at weekends. So I don't think the laundry special will be anytime soon, unless he's filming it himself, in which case I wouldn't need to be anywhere near him. So let's drop the old screen share, shall we, for now? And I think we'll be bringing this show to a close very soon. I've been going over an hour. I wasn't convinced I was going to be able to take this show up to an hour tonight because the topics weren't hugely in-depth issues, because there's not a whole lot to talk about this week. Not any crazy new releases to sink my fangs into. Let's see. The hobby habit. Andy, I think you and I both know goblins would make you happier, but if you want to play with dead bodies, just realise that is your decision. Yes, it certainly is. 3 giants, nice. Yes, it will be nice if I get this here giant painted. I think I showed you this last week as well. I haven't done anything on it since then, but there you go. Painting wise, apart from that, I'm also working on, I showed you this Necromancer who's almost finished, just needs his base sanding a bit. And I've also been assembling some Kings of War undead infantry, because I had a lot of them still on the sprues, like these ghouls, which I've assembled. I've got about 8 of those. So the good thing about ghouls, they look similar to the zombies. So if I want to make even more units of zombies, I can just kind of put them towards the back and they don't look too out of place. And then if I want to use them as ghouls, I just take them all out and put them on their separate tray. And you can tell the difference because they're a different colour. But they do also fit in as zombies if need be. And I've also got this box here, which contains, just making sure I'm not going to show my address to anybody. There we go. So in this box here, there is a lot of Mantic skeleton revenants. There's about 30 of them in there, which would be enough for me to do a horde of 40 with some gravestones on the movement tray. So I may do a video on magnetizing Mantic bases, actually, because I found a really efficient way of doing it, involving drilling them while still on the sprue. So I may do something with that video-wise. You can tell they're magnetized because they're all sticking together. But I'm not in any huge rush to get these guys done because I don't have any current plans to use them in a list. But I do want more zombies because at some point I want to try out a triple legion list. So I may get some more zombies for that purpose. Also, I've been painting a little bit because I played with my Slaanesh Crab Chaos Space Marines the other day. I was inspired to pick up the old brush and put some paint on Wesley Snips, who is my lord. Let's see if you can get a good focused look at him. There you go. And the company, what's the company? I think it's Spellcrow, most of this model is made from. And then there's some GW bits on there as well. And he does have magnetized back and some wings as well, which I made from Vargeist bits. So magnetizes on there, the old wings. So he can fly and hang around with my warp talons. And I started working on his shoulder pad a bit there, the old Crimson Crabs logo, which is crab. Let's see if you can see that clearly. There you go. It's actually like the, can't remember what they're called, the something scorpions, but I cut the scorpion tail off the shoulder pad because someone sent me a ton of the Forge World shoulder pads with the scorpions on, and I've just cut the tails off them, so they're crabs. So it works out quite nicely. I think you'll agree. Looking forward to getting him in there. I do quite like the old warp talons in 40k under the current rules because, especially since I've got them Slaaneshified, they're like the ultimate power armor killers because they can pretty much decide when they're going to fight. Against bikes, it's somewhat even, but against regular power armor Marines, they're faster than them. They're always going to strike first because they have the higher initiative from being Slaanesh, and then they have AP3 on their attacks, so your average Space Marine or bike isn't going to get save against them. So I found them quite tasty. Newbie, Crimson Crabs lols. Yes, I did used to have a lot of videos on the old Crimson Crabs back when I was working on them, but lost a bit of interest in 40k over the last couple of years. If you go back, you can find the video on my Defiler somewhere. If you just type in Slaanesh Defiler on my channel, you should be able to find that. Let's see. The hobby habit is apparently dying because of the name Wesley Snips. Yes, that is an excellent name. And I'm looking forward to getting him on the table at some point. I think I might paint him to somewhat resemble the person that his name is obviously based on as well. I haven't decided yet. I may well go that route though. Let's see. Any other comments before we go? Anyone got any questions before I depart for the night? Let's see here. Anybody? While people are potentially typing, I'm just going to have a quick look at the old Facebook, see if anyone left a comment in there. Looks like someone did. This is from Matt, who says, did this many times over the last couple of decades with 40k and Warhammer. I get excited about new models, buy a whole lot thinking I'll paint it up and then find someone to play and then do nothing with it. I learned now just getting a few things at a time and set my expectations low with finding someone to play with and just be happy with having a collection I might play once in a blue moon. Yes, that's the best way to go. If you're buying anything and you're not 100% sure you have an opponent for that game system, make sure it's something that you're going to enjoy painting and that you could still be happy even if you never played a game of it in your life. And if you're relying on maybe one person and their circumstances aren't necessarily the most stable, for example, at any moment they could move or suddenly have a load of children, then don't bank on them being a regular opponent for you for that game system. So again, make sure it's something you're going to enjoy painting. If it's just a thriving community of just non-stop people, you can't walk 5 yards out your house without bumping into someone who plays that system, then just go nuts. And it doesn't even have to be that fun to paint because you're bound to find opponents for it, aren't you? Let's see if we've got any questions then. Mini Warrior, is your room... What? Is your room a frisbee stuck to rats? I think we need you to clarify that statement, Mini Warrior. Okay, time for the Seraphon. Can't wait to get the Blood Angels rolling again. Stuck on AOS since it came out. Yes, I'm really hoping that 40k makes the necessary changes to get my interest sparked again, and a lot of other people out there. Apparently, Roomba is a little vacuum robot. Right, so I think they were just talking among themselves there. Although, speaking of vacuums, let's see here, because I've got something very exciting to show you right now. This will be first. This was something I got for my birthday, actually. It is a USB-powered vacuum. Excellent for cleaning out keyboards and the area surrounding the computer, because obviously you can't take it too far with it being USB-powered, but it's actually quite powerful. I've had like portable vacuums before that were really awful, but this one, despite its small size, and probably it was quite cheap, but the fact that it's USB powered, I like it. It's pretty tasty. Of course, it pales in comparison to this birthday present, which just has no end of uses, which is the Yoda light. So if there's a sudden power cut and for some reason I can't reach my phone, then I could just reach up on top of the desk and grab Yoda, who will spew green light out of his face to illuminate the room. Let's see. A couple more people have just popped in just as we're about to go off the air, including the Wargamer Viking, who's late to the party, unfortunately. Let's see. Any other questions before I go? Nope, I think that's it. So, folks, I hope you've enjoyed this 2d6 Friday. Of course, the only way to start your weekend, if you're any kind of wargamer, worth your salt. Time for the Seraphon thinks I should convert this Yoda, apparently. I don't know about that. I've also got this Yoda. And this one, actually, let's just do this. I can press the button and he's going to speak to you and give you a word of wisdom. And then as soon as he does that, I'm going to show you the wonderful logo for the show, and then we'll go off the air. So, words of wisdom from Yoda, first of all.
No